This video is an attempt to explain how I have set up what I think is the appropriate way to set up security for a secure query module request. So you'll notice here that I am in my security XML file. Again, I'm not going to go all the way through connecting the dots, but hopefully you'll get the idea of what I want. Let me first describe the characteristics of what I want for the request. When I make a secure selection list type of inquiry, the only thing that I really care about is that the user has been authenticated. There's nothing that needs to be protected within that security selection list, and if the user doesn't have the appropriate authorities, they're not going to be shown the values to select anyway. So I'm not too concerned about that. What I do want to do, though, is I want to make sure, without any shadow of any reasonable doubt, that they cannot access a query module, let alone on the builder page, let alone to actually submit it and run it to get a result. I want to make sure that that is totally locked down. So with that in mind, this is how I configure things. My filter chain proxy, not much has changed here. I have secure query results first because that's most specific. I have the secure query next because that is a little more specific than the general. Then I have my authentication, and then I have my admin publishing as last. But let's look at the authentication filter chain first. I want to show the URLs that I'm protecting here. Anything that's user, anything that's the query definition, because these are things where these are requests that they need to have their query selections and any user type information available to them when they make those types of requests. Now you'll notice the last entry here is the secure selection. So anything that follows the secure selection, all they have to do is be authenticated to make that selection. Next thing I'm going to show you is when they actually make a secure query. So I guess I am going to connect the dots a little bit. So if I look at the secure query filter chain, here's the definition for that. And the URL that it's going to match is it's going to say anything that's secure query. So this is secure query selection. This is secure query, any of the module builder, submit, or result type requests. Map requests, anything that has this prefix of secure query is going to have to go through this filter mechanism. So I have a secure query access interceptor filter, which is defined down here at the bottom of the file. It has a secure metadata source property of secure query metadata source. So let's take a look at that first, because this is really the key part of what you want to do. You'll notice in here I have the URL that's very specific, and it has a specific authority. And that is all that's, well, I have my is authenticated fully in here as well. That one doesn't, so the role voter and the authentication voter, they actually use the same base code, and they check for this. They know what this value is. This is kind of a special case value, and they know how to handle this one. So you cannot access any of these other query modules unless you have one of these authorities to make this request. This has been tested, and I can demonstrate it if you'd like. But suffice it to say, this is what I do. And if you want to set up all your query modules, if you have 10 query modules that need to be secured, you need to have an entry in here for each one with the appropriate value, and then your user obviously will have to have the appropriate authority to make that request. So that is the metadata source. Next thing I want to show is the Secure Query Access Decision Manager. That has two voters. It has an authentication voter, which uses the metadata source to make sure, and it picks up this value. So that's the first thing that it does. And the next thing that it does is it uses the authorization role voter. Again, we're on the Secure Query Access Manager. You'll notice I turned off allow if all abstain. I want to make sure everybody votes that they have access, because I want this to be locked down. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the security authorization role voter, which is defined right here. And you notice that I have the role prefix turned off. The only reason I do that is to make it easy for someone to connect the dots and administer the user's authorities to the privilege that's needed to make that request. So if I did have a role prefix, the role prefix would have to be on this value right here. In a previous video I showed how role prefixes work, so it would be role underscore and then whatever the actual privilege is. The last thing that I want to show, and I've already kind of covered on this when I did the role level security, but the last one I want to show is when you make a secure query result request, because here we have to lock down. This is only for role level type privileges. So if I look at my proxy up here again, the very first one, because it's the most specific, is this secure query result filter chain. And the result filter chain matches on a little more specific URL, which is secure query result, and it calls this more specific interceptor filter. And this interceptor filter uses the same metadata source. It uses the same authentication provider manager, but it uses a specific decision manager. And we'll go take a look at that list. This list is the same as the normal secure query decision manager list, other than I added one more voter. So what happens is that they have to be authenticated, they have to have access to the query module, and it has to pass this dimension value voter as well. And again, not again, but if you look at how I have all of these voters set up, they are all unanimous. They all have to vote to allow these. They all have to allow the user. They all have to vote allow for the user to have access to that type of request. And that's basically how I have it set up. Again, this setup is only for secure query modules, the secure selection page, and for standard self-registered user type requests. Any other type of privileges, well, it also handles secure query results that have dimension values that have privileges on them as well. Again, these configurations do nothing for showing the users what they have privileges to. That's a totally different security mechanism. It's not really security, it's just user interface stuff. This is the actual security mechanism that makes sure that you only have access to the things that you should have access to. If you have other special needs, then you're going to have to go in and create your own interceptor filters with their own metadata sources, the appropriate metadata source values, and make sure the user has the correct authorities. So I hope that was helpful. As always, please feel free to give me a call. Thanks.